Good. Well, that is a nice introduction on the TADAT, and Justin's introduction has been there before that. So, as Ms. Grasso already said, we have also TADAT at a subnational level, and that's why I'm very happy to introduce to you in this first panel Dr. George Santoro. He's on my, I always have problem, but this is my left and your right, this on my side. Secretary of Finance in Alagoas state in Brazil. So yes, welcome, Dr. Santoro. Then we have Ms. France Bilodeau, who is the Director General for Strategy and Integration at the Canadian Revenue Authority. Welcome,
thank you,
France. And then we have on the far end, Mr. Gustavo Garcia, who is the Fiscal and Municipal Management Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. So welcome, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you.
We will now start. What we will do in this session is to look back on the experience of TADAT and which maybe unexpected additions have been made to TADAT, because originally TADAT was only envisaged at the national level, but it has been since then also successfully implemented at the subnational level. And then in Canada, there have been additions to TADAT in another sense on the benefit side, so we will want to hear more about that and how TADAT it's evolving, it's a dynamic, it's not a static TADAT, it's a very dynamic TADAT, as you will find out during this session. And then finally, Mr. Garcia will give his comments on the experiences in the region that he is covering by his bank. So, Dr. Santoro, can I ask you now, you will give a short presentation and you have some slides brought with you, I think. So, please, you have the floor. Would you like to stand here? Okay.
Good morning. This is going to be a very brief presentation. I'm going to talk to you in Portuguese because I'm more at ease with my native language. I would like to place you regarding Brazil's current situation, what the state of Alagoas is, what the Brazilian Federation is, and the importance of TADAT in the state of Alagoas and how this is being carried out in Brazil. I am speaking on behalf of our companion from the bearded Dr. Totosh, who wasn't able to join us today. Initially, as you can see, Brazil is a very large economy, but it's a federation. And it's a federation that is divided in three levels, state and municipal level. And the three levels are able to collect taxes. The state of Alagoas is located in the northeast of Brazil. It has a very small and poor economy and is undergoing some very major changes. And these changes regarding tax have been affecting the collection of taxes in the state. Initially, as you can see, we have a primary economy. We talk here on my presentation only about sugar production, but we also produce oil and gas. And tourism is one of the main areas contributing to our economy. But we also have plastic and chemistry contributing to our economy, which has an extraction of prime materials that contribute to plastic being produced in the state. But we are facing a lot of social problems, and we require federal contributions to make up the tax collection so that we can cover all of our annual expenses. Why would we have a TADAT at a subnational level? In the case of Brazil, states are responsible for the main tax, which is a tax collected on services and goods, which corresponds to 20% of the tax revenue in Brazil. This is a very relevant data, and it's under the management of the Brazilian states, improving the tax collection. The tax organization is extremely important for Brazil because this ICMS, which is a tax on goods and services, is like the VAT, and it has kind of changed since it was first conceived, and it has to be improved. But this tax in Brazil is legislated independently by each state, which generates some constraints. A company has to face 27 different legislations covering this VAT-like tax, and we need to simplify our tax collection with our local VAT. The other taxes are still under the purveyance of the country itself, of the union, and they're focused on contribution to social security, which is kind of concentrated by the collection with the federal government, and it's not shared with the states and the municipalities. And this is something else that is affecting the tax administration in Brazil. As it was mentioned before, the record for the three levels of the government ends up becoming a conflict between the federal government, between the state, and between the municipalities. Each one has a record, and they should all converge, and this is a bottleneck for our country. I will show you how our revenue is. You have a little bit of information regarding our growth. There has been many changes with tax collection. There have been major changes for the collection model in the state of Alagoas, but this process wasn't enough for us. We needed to have best practices and to develop a new model for tax administration in our state. Even though we had better revenue that was above the GDP, above inflation during the last fiscal years. So we felt that we needed to have a new model, especially for tax collections, especially for our VAT-like tax. But we needed something else. So I'm going to give you a general idea about how TADAT was introduced in Brazil. As Director Carla Grasso said, we have 300 trained advisors in 300 trained advisors in Brazil since 2017. The state of Alagoas carried out the TADAT assessment. The same happened in Rio de Janeiro, and we hope that during the current year we will have more training and new auditors. This program has been developed in a partnership with the IMF, the DIB, and other tax advisors, and we have had huge success in Alagoas with the 2017 assessment, followed by the one that took place in Rio de Janeiro. I've been a Secretary of Finance both of the state of Rio de Janeiro and of the state of Alagoas. So here we have some snapshots of our meetings. We think this program was highly successful because it helped us train our teams, but also it brought a kind of a spirit of teamwork and bringing everybody together and bringing the best practices that we find worldwide for tax management. We share that with our staff. It's very difficult sometimes for our staff to figure out how they're placed worldwide. So to have someone from abroad to present the best practices and bring them up to date of what is happening worldwide is very important to help them identify their strengths and their weaknesses and to make them realize that they need to go through a major shift of paradigm. And we see this in Alagoas, we see this in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and this is the important in the process for subnational level. It's a change that sometimes is not noticed at federal level. But we were able to make the report available, which is important after the assessment, but making everything available in a transparent manner is extremely important both for the assessors and for society in general.
There's great commitment with this process for change, which is an overlying factor here and one of our main goals. And that is why one of the main reasons we brought TADAT to Alagoas. We believe that this process led to great change, as I've mentioned to you, not only changes in our staff's mindset as to what is the ideal performance, but also great savings, because we ended up using this diagnostic tool as the starting point for a strategic planning exercise we carried out right afterwards. We made use of the auditing process, part of TADAT, to start planning this strategic program to change our current situation in the state. This is a timeline. We are obviously in 2018. We are currently implementing our strategic planning based on what we identified as our weaknesses through TADAT's assessment, and even areas in which we scored well. We also decided to target to further improve our performance even in those areas. The biggest lesson we learned is that we gained so much internal knowledge, the entire team did, and that saved everybody time and resources. A similar strategic plan would take over 6 months. Instead, we followed the previously carried out assessment and we connected every score and every program. As you can see, I have the information detailed per indicator, per score, per assessment. We developed a project or a program for each one of them. There is a manager in charge of each one, and TADAT represented the starting point of that process. It was vital for everyone to be engaged, and the team that was a part of the program and brought TADAT to Alagoas did such great work that all of our public servants bought in. They are fully committed to this change, this new process, and we believe that within 2 years we should be able to carry out a new assessment. I would like to request that happen to see what kind of goals we have reached. especially through the guidance of the auditing process. And I have here two suggestions, two components that were very important to us. Internal controls. In subnational entities, it's a little different from the federal government level. We believe perhaps we have to improve indicators to broaden them perhaps a little more. At the subnational level, there is an office that may have external employees. Perhaps we could have a tax compliance program within the state. That would be very helpful. It's a suggestion. Perhaps you could consider that possible improvement. And another aspect that called our attention within this program is integration between revenues and accounting for subnational entities. That should happen within the federal government and its municipalities in Brazil, which to us is very relevant, this interface between the tax administration and the accounting records of these transactions in a transparent manner. And how is this information used in a satisfactory and timely manner in order for decision-making to take place? We have this integration between PEFA and TADAT. Perhaps we could develop some kind of tool not only for capacity building, for training the team, but also when it comes time to apply, to carry out the assessment itself. We feel like integrating the financial team would be critical. The tax people are not carrying out the financial activities. It's the accounting division that does so. I'd like to show you a little bit of the beauties we find in Alagoas. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting us all to Alagoas.
Yeah.
And it's not only the beaches, but it is also, you have more to show there than the beaches, I understand. Mr. Santoro, just one question. Could you give an example of where where there are problems at national level that also affect the implementation of the subnational TADAT at your state level? Could you give an example of that? And then maybe also how you have solved that?
Principal exemplo que a gente...
The main example I could give you, something we were able to identify, is this interaction between tax administration and accounting records. That is always a challenge because the vision is quite different. The way the tax people see things and the way the accountant side sees things is very different. That generates conflict, and we're trying to improve in that area. There is also tax refunds that need to be worked out, how quickly we answer requests by taxpayers. We depend on the finance department for all of that. So we're trying to create a program that we have called so far a current account program. This is basically the state's receivables that will be integrated in that system. Even though it is a tax system, it will be placed within the financial management system for the state so that we can fulfill and be in compliance with international accounting standards within the deadline set by the federal government for next year. We will have these receivables per se fully integrated, which will facilitate assessment as well as tax refunds and the time for assessing tax issues and tax disputes, and we'll have this interface between the two areas fully functional.
Thank you very much. And I think what you mentioned also in your presentation is that the TADAT exercise, going together through the TADAT exercise, it helped team building and bringing people from different departments together. And I think that's another very valuable aspect of the going through a TADAT exercise. Now I would like to turn to Ms. France Bilodeau, and Canada, as I already explained, has added some new dimensions to the TADAT, and I would like you to explain to the audience a little bit about how you have taken the TADAT as it was and how you have built on that for your exercise in Canada.
Perfect. Thanks. So thank you so much for the invite and for us to share our experience with the TADAT. I just would like to give you maybe a little bit of background why we came of using the TADAT. In the spring of 2017, our commissioner, Mr. Bob Hamilton, he was kind of still new in the agency and wanted to know to which extent the Canada Revenue Agency is a world-class tax and benefit organization. So he launched that process without necessarily knowing what will come out of it or having a methodology himself. He approached us and he said, okay, can you find out if we are a world-class tax and benefits organization? So I was tasked with that particular task. And at the beginning, I was a bit scared, where am I going with this? But we approached a few countries that use the TADAT, specifically Norway. And after reviewing the tool, we felt that, yes, it will be a good tool to assess the organization. We look at all the various aspects of the tool, so we thought it's a good tool for us to try. So the project started in the spring, and there was 3 components of that project. One was engagement, was very important for the commissioner to engage employee, but not also employee, but stakeholders in that process. Second was the assessment itself, and the third was also to guide and with the finding, start the conversation about the strategic direction for the agency. So the first, as part of the engagement, we launched using a tool, electronic tool. Just with a bit of context, Canada Revenue Agency is a big organization. We have 44,000 employees, generating billions of dollars in revenue, but also we have also what we call benefit also aspect. Not a lot of tax organizations have the benefit aspect, so we generate also billions of tax benefit through the administration. So we launched that interactive tool to find out from the staff if they felt that we were a world-class tax and benefit organization. So based on our 5 priorities, which is innovation, people, service, compliance, and integrity. So it was a voluntary participation, so over 5,000 employees participated in this engagement, and that also informed how we would assess the organization. They felt that we were very strong on certain aspects, but the area where they felt that we needed a little bit more working harder maybe was around innovation. You don't see a lot of innovation often in the tax organization, and also risk control. So that aspect was something important for our employee, and the other aspect was around people. So that informed the whole setup. So we used the TADAT, but we use multiple tools also to assess. So when we look at the TADAT, we find out that it doesn't really assess the benefits. So we took upon ourselves to say, okay, using that framework, we will also develop another, using the TADAT type of framework, something regarding benefit. And we have developed that with the IMF, and we are about to share also with the UK aides. They approach us to work with us on this. And there's the innovation tool that we have developed, and an innovation tool that was, we look around to see if there was something to assess innovation. Was very difficult to find, but we did quite a bit of research, did a bit of consultation with academic, also connected with the OECD, and we created an innovation tool that assessed our organization. And then we launched the TADAT. So it took a few months to do the assessment. The way we did it, we engaged the region. We have, like I said, we have a large country, so it was important for our assessor We have 2 TADAT assessors certified, but we had also a group of internal auditors that work with us that were not necessarily TADAT assessor, but was part of our team. And we'll also reach out to our senior expert in the region. It was important for us to ensure that the region are engaged as much as the headquarter, because sometimes you have different opinion from a regional perspective and from a headquarter perspective. So at the end of that, we had the result. We had quite a bit of a comprehensive review, and our commissioner publicized. A lot of countries sometimes don't publicize that. Because it can be you know, opening the closet and people look at, like I know for Canada, a lot of people thought, well, you have probably A's all over. And
you didn't?
No, we didn't. But at the same time, it was important when we wrote the summary report for us to put some context, because from country to country, the context is different. And interpretation of the result in silo could lead to misinterpretations. So we spent quite a bit of time also writing the summary report to add also dimension that maybe not necessarily are required from the TADAT perspective. For us, it was important to corroborate some of the finding with internal audit that had been done in the past, OAG, it's Auditor General of Canada. They do a regular review of all the departments in the Canada. So to corroborate with maybe private sector type of assessment that had been done at the agency to kind of solidify the finding of the TADAT, because when you get not so great result, the first reaction, and it's normal, is to be very defensive. And also blaming on the fact that maybe the TADAT is for developed country. You know, it's not for a country like Canada. So when you have the corroboration of those findings with other piece of information, so it made the result a little bit more robust. So we publicized the result in May, at the same time that it was a CIAT conference. Our commissioner decided to publicize the TADAT and share with the various countries our results. And as a result of that, I'm not going to talk necessarily about the result. You can read this information. It's on the canada.ca, and also I think on the TADAT website it has been publicized. But we will use this information to guide our strategic plan coming up. And just above and beyond the result, what also we were able to do because of the exercise of the TADAT, and because TADAT look at the tax organization as a system, which is quite different. Often we assess in silo and we're missing the big picture. I like the TADAT for that perspective, because we were able to dig a little bit deeper and find out that above our weakness, there's a fundamental issue that happened in Canada, is that we are pretty much good in our silo of compliance, or certain group, very, very good, very performant, but their performance sometimes may impact another aspect of the silo, which is maybe where we are weak, is the not conflict resolution, but the resolution of tax and also the growing debt. So I like the TADAT from that perspective, and also what the root cause, I think, of all our weaknesses is around the horizontality, the fact that, like I said, we are very good in our silo, but in terms of sharing, having strategy that encompass all the various groups, we are a bit weak in that aspect. And another thing that we found out also is that in terms of performance measurement, we have lots of performance measurement, but some of them are not necessarily as good as they could be, or are as transparent as they could be. So all that to say is that the TADAT was an excellent exercise for us, a good reflection of how we can do better. And also we're looking forward to improve the tool. Recently we were asked to participate at the working level to improve the TADAT. Certainly using it, there's opportunity for improvement, especially around calibration of some of those measures. indicator, because if nobody can achieve certain measure, obviously maybe there's some calibration that need to be done. But we were very pleased with the exercise, and also with the fact that we had quite a bit of support from the TADAT Secretariat, very helpful throughout the process. So from our perspective, the TADAT exercise was very good. So.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and it's very nice. Of course, TADAT, we are development partners, and we supported the development of TADAT. So we had primarily in mind to help the partner countries with because there is the need is most urgent to boost domestic revenue mobilization. But we've seen that Norway applied it, and there is a representative there. We will talk a little bit later about it, I think. And you have applied it, and so it's nice to see that it has developed into a true global good. And I mean, it's used across countries, and so it doesn't put a stigma if you use it that you are a poorer country, but it is for everybody, and it can help everyone. And it can help in team building, and it can help also in planning further steps. So, and this is also what you explained, Dr. Santoro. You explained about how you have gone into implementation afterwards, and this is where we discussed also in the steering committee that is not, of course, it's an assessment and it is a diagnostic, but you don't want to walk away from the doctor without any, what to do next to improve your health. So, and that is what you have done, you have gone to take the next step, Dr. Santoro, and that's very... Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I just want to add about the next step. I forgot to ask to
yes, that would be nice.
So Canada also are addressing the next step. So what we have done as a result of the finding, we ask also for the various groups to come up with an action plan, similar to what we do when we have an audit, where we ask specific action plan to be developed, and this will be monitored at our management table, senior management table, to ensure that action plan are put in place, because we want to reuse the TADAT probably in 3 years, 4 years down the road to reassess and see how much progress we have made. So from that perspective, it's all good.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to turn to Dr. Garcia, and you are covering the Inter-American region, and maybe you could give your views on how TADAT has helped to say raise interest in domestic revenue mobilization in your region, and then maybe you could also go into how that TADAT has helped to improve the quality of revenue collection in your region. So, Mr. Garcia, if you can go into that.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the Fiscal Affairs Department, and particularly the TADAT unit, for inviting me to share with you our experience in the Latin American and the Caribbean region. As you know, the Inter-American Development Bank is a development bank. We have a very large portfolio in the area in terms of technical cooperations, investment loans, and policy-based loans. We have a permanent portfolio of loans of about between 4 and 5 billions, and we more or less during a year we renovate that stock of loans for about $1 billion every year. We place more than $1 billion every year in fiscal loans, either investment loans or policy-based loans. In our division, the Fiscal and Municipal Management Division, we work all the fiscal area is the main Fiscal Affairs Department of the IMF, because we are only 25, 26 professional staff, and we work on tax policy and tax administration, public expenditure policies and administration or management like PFM, CIAF, procurement process, and so on, and also on macro fiscal issues. The reason for that is that our policy-based loans are basically to finance structural reforms, institutional reforms, and so on, are more policy-oriented. But then we have investment laws, as I mentioned, that basically finance the acquisition of goods and services, training. For example, if we detect, according to TADAT, weaknesses in the technology information system in the tax administration that need to be modernized and so on, so we give them the loans so that they can contract consultancy companies, buy the computer system and so on. So we work in the two areas. In many occasions, we have the policy-based loans complemented with investment loans because you need to revamp the tax administration from infrastructure to consultancy, training, and so on. Of course, we have also a large portfolio of about 40 technical cooperations that are basically for consultancy and training. So going specifically on how we use TADAT, of course, is one of the most important elements that we use to detect the weaknesses and the strengths of the tax administration in the region. I would say tax policy and tax administration is probably a little bit more than half of our portfolio and the dialogue. We have a very open capacity of dialogue in the region. And this assessment that is done by TADAT allow us to see the areas of intervention that we can discuss with the authority. It's a very important reference for us to start dialogue with the authorities at a national and subnational level. We work at the two levels. I would say that probably 40% or almost 50%, depending every year on the programming of our portfolio. We have loans and technical cooperation at subnational and national level. Let me tell, for example, in Brazil, we have a very large program that is called Fiscal. It's a program to strengthen the tax administration of the states in Brazil, but also includes the Receita Federal, which is the tax administration at the federal level. For example, the Profisco portfolio that we did, the first Profisco one was about $600 million, and now we have a second credit line for all the states in Brazil of about $900 million. So TADAT allows us to see what are the strengths and the weaknesses of the tax administration in the region. It's not the only one, but it's one of the most important, of course, and allow us to detect what are the areas of intervention where we put the emphasis in our loans and technical cooperations with the country. I would say for the time being, that's what I want to mention. One of the areas that we think that we should probably, I think there is an area in the seminar that we need to discuss, is that approximately half of the tax administration in the region also have custom administrations, and we have detected a lot of problems in terms of the administration of revenue in customs that are very complicated in Latin America. Most of them are very weak institutionally, but this is a very important reference. In the region, between 30 and more than 50% of the value-added tax collection is done at the custom level. But when we try to see the amount of credit in the value-added tax that is accounted for in the customs, is probably more than 70%. And the reason is very simple. When you collect 40–50% of the VAT revenue in customs, most of it is going to come back again as a credit because except imports realized by the final consumers are going to be later on it's going to come back to the tax administration to be returned as a credit. But then you have the exports, okay? And the exports are supposed to be taxed at a zero rate, and in the region, all of them, there was a big distortion in Argentina. Fortunately, it was removed, but all exports have the right to a credit. That's the reason why they are charged at a zero rate. And they discount the credit for domestic and external purchases, and then it is a very large component of the credits in the value add. Let me mention, for example, in Mexico, 75 of total credit in the value-added tax come from international transactions. So I think this is one of the areas that has to be strengthened even more, and I'm very glad that TADAT is including that in one of the areas that is going to be discussed in some moment in this seminar. Thank you.
So this is a big leakage, according to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also there is a linkage between the income tax and the value-added tax, because all the goods and services that are sold or bought by companies are part of the income tax. If you don't see well the customs, you're missing two very important pieces of information. But again, this is a wonderful instrument for us, very useful, as I mentioned before, because when we want to start the dialogue with the authorities for tax policy and tax administration, that assessments is one of the most important columns for that part of our work.
Well, thank you very much for that contribution, and that's another takeaway for this day, to that customs. This is really a plea to include that customs element by you. I would like then turn to the audience and see if there are any questions from your side to the panel members based on our discussion so far. If you could use the mic, there are mics here. If you would then say your name and where you work and have your question posed. And if you want to pose it to a particular member of the panel, then you could.
Sure. I'd been asked by the Secretariat to share a bit of the experience in Jordan. I'm Ron McMorrin. I'm with Deloitte Consulting. We're the implementing partner on a USAID-funded project that partly works with the tax administration. The experiences that you talked about in Canada and Brazil in terms of how you're using the TADAT work is much the same as what we've seen in Jordan. In March 2016, the TADAT assessment was completed, and over the course of the remainder of 2016, the Jordan tax administration looked at where it was weak, particularly in areas where they were at C or below on the ratings. Excuse me. And they developed, it was 13 projects for 2017 and a further 11 for 2018. And they've made modest steps forward, particularly in terms of the electronic services, improving some of their compliance activities, including risk-based audit management, developing risk plans, dealing with core things like the taxpayer registry. So from my observation on how Jordan has used the TADAT is really a management tool. They've done a benchmark, they've identified areas where it's weak, and much like Canada and Brazil, they've developed action plans to start improving things, and that really has been the core benefit in many ways of the TADAT assessment. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's another example then of maybe the steering committee doesn't have to worry about the follow-up, because you are going into the next phase right away, and I mean, don't stop at the diagnostic level, but you go in, do the next step and fix the things that have to be fixed. So that's very good to hear. Are there any other questions to the panel? Please, you give your name and then.
Of course, I can follow those instructions. My name is Nathan Copeland. I work with Oxfam, and I'm really interested to hear the subnational case in Brazil. I might even download the report and read it. But I have a question actually more about the process and your experience with that process, about simply sort of how long did it take to do this assessment at the subnational level? What kind of resource restraints did you have? Did you face any internal resistance to drawing on those resources to do this? And if so, what did it take to overcome that resistance internally? Really interested to hear about that experience. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's good to have you here because we are open, and it's that exercise is also, I mean, a start of a stakeholder process in the countries, we hope. So, Dr. Santoro, can you enlighten us a little bit how long it took and what resources, and please, the floor is yours.
Agradeço.
Thank you very much for the question. In truth, I think that TADAT was not resistance, did not see it rather, any resistance. There was a process that integrated the team given the very beginnings of this work in the state of Alagoas. And this has ripple effects in other states of Brazil. But it's always in this sense. The TADAT ended up bringing together the team. And why is that? Because we're talking about an outside entity which is very much respected and does this assessment with no political intention nor to evaluate anything. The aim is to improve the fiscal management, and this is very well received by civil servants, career people who will be there regardless of the ideology or the politician who takes over nationally. This was very positive in the state of Alagoas, and it was a very rewarding process. The time it took for us between the beginning and end of the project, we had a training period which was about a week, and then we had a preparatory period before the training started. Our team prepared itself to receive the TADAT team. This allowed for discussions about the internal problems. This initial pre-period was about 30 days, but the first session was a training session, and then we had 30 days after that, we had the assessment session, which was also about a week. I admit that the TADAT team worked overnight in order to produce the report because the audit time is very short. There are many themes. It was somehow a new idea. Now the process is more mature, and the new subnational assessments will go more quickly. I'd like to reinforce what Gustavo said in terms of the customs side of it. On the national level, we have the regional customs and the financial credit, which in Brazil is not very clear yet. In the subnational level, we use the financial credit related both to internal transactions in the state and imports as well. This generates concern in terms of reimbursing the taxpayer. And as I said in my presentation, there is the financial aspect. Many times the fiscal area does not worry about the impact of such credits with time. Such impacts are very important, and sometimes they explain the non-growth of collection in spite of improvements in management and in collection. Therefore, we have to look at the both international and internal customs issues all the time.
Much for that Mr. Garcia, could you say something about whether the TADAT and the follow-up of the TADAT have there been applications for technical assistance from your bank? And
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
And maybe loans for bigger projects?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, when we detect the weaknesses and strengths, that allow us to detect the areas of interventions in the dialogue with the authorities, but it also allows us to put benchmark in those areas that are with the lowest grade in the evaluation of TADAT in the performance outcome areas. And we use that also as a benchmark in order to improve the tax administration. One of the countries that we are working now is, for example, Peru. There was a excellent report by TADAT, but as I mentioned before, in Peru was one of the cases by which we detect that the custom administration has so many weaknesses that were not detected in the report because the report does not include the custom administration, which is part of the tax administration in Peru called the SUNAT, Superintendencia Nacional de Administración Tributaria. So this is one of the areas. We, as I mentioned before, we have a very large program in Brazil, the Profisco 1 that was already concluded, and now the Profisco 2, which is a loan for one of the East 27 states, and the Receta Federal, the tax administration at the federal level, so for sharing information to solve the problem of registration of the taxpayers and so on. It is one of the areas that we also take as a very important reference in order to elaborate our program of intervention with the states in Brazil.
Very good.
Can
Yes,
I
please. Yeah.
maybe answer also some of the question that the previous person asked? So in Canada, I was somebody asked how long it took. So in Canada, it took a little bit more time because, like I said, as part of our exercise, it was also about engagement, and it was a new process. So we do a lot of internal audit. We have also in government what we call the Auditor General of Canada that do random audit on certain programs. So this was a new approach. So we wanted to ensure that we had the engagement. So at the core, we had a dedicated team that was dedicated to ensure that we're communicating and also providing training, high-level training to the people that participated in that exercise. But I think also the success of this lie also with the leadership of the commissioner in place. For him, it was important. He already said at the beginning that this is something, not just a report that, okay, it's nice exercise and we'll accumulate dust after a while. It was something important, and also the fact that we are doing an action plan and it's going to be reviewed by his management team at the senior level also set the tone for the TADAT. So just so I think in order for this to be successful, I think it's linked to the leadership of the people in place to make this as an important part of a tool with multiple tools to improve the tax organization.
Yes, the leadership is of course important here, and the leadership is also important for the further steps, because if there is no reform-mindedness in the country, then and no support at the highest level, then that becomes an obstacle, and it ends. Then the TADAT would die there. Yeah. Let's say that would be. But I think TADAT has. I think it was developed actually during implementation, from the first experience to have TADAT training prior to the, and that is not only a training, but it is much more than that. It's a discussion as well with the various people that are subsequently going to be part of the assessment. So that has been very helpful in making it a group process, I think. And that would also, a good preparation takes away also the worries that you are being examined and that it is, that you have to worry about the scores that you get, because the scores are there to find out the weaknesses and to see where the country can be supported. Mr. Yes, please. Yeah, take the mic, and then Stefan. Yes.
Okay, thank
Kiyoshi,
you.
please. Yeah.
Kiyoshi Nakayama, Fiscal Affairs Department. I have a question to Ms. Bilodeau. I'm not sure my pronunciation is correct.
It's quite okay.
Okay. I understand CRA has been a key member of the several tax administrator forum in OECD as a forum for advanced country. My question is, has your commissioner or senior management of CRA shared CRA's experience using TADAT with other colleagues in advanced country, or has a plan to do so? I think there might be some misperception among the executive senior management in advanced countries tax administration. TADAT are only for emerging economy or developing country. In that sense, sharing the CRA's experience could be very useful for those countries. Thank you.
Yes. Certainly. As part of this exercise, our commissioner was very clear at the beginning that he wanted for this to be a transparent exercise. And for sure, we have some politics internally. Initially, it was also his desire to share, but we have to also work with our minister to ensure, and our board of management, the way we are structured, to ensure everybody work comfortable with sharing of the information. We share the result of our findings at the CIAT conferences. So our documentation is publicized, is on the Canada.ca. And just overall, there was no big thing that came as a shock because, like I said before, we have quite a bit of regularly audit in that sphere. So some of the findings were also corroborated by other findings that it was maybe a 5 years report or a recent audit that was done. So there was no shocker, but what was the underpin of all those findings, and this is why I like the TADAT, because it looks like the tax organization as a system. It reinforced the fact that, like I said before, we're very good in silo, but when it starts about collaborating, having common strategy, integration of some of our program, we're not so good at that.
And I think you are not unique in that.
Pardon?
And working in silos is not unique in Canada.
No, but it's even though we think we're very good, and it's not that we're not good, we're good, but we can do better at horizontality, and also performance measurement was also another factor that came out as not having necessarily all the right measure to measure the outcome for Canadians, but also having a measure that are transparent, that also robust. So this is part of our also outlook in revising our plan to ensure we address those things moving forward. But no, our commissioner was very open about it, and we had shared the results.
Well, we do hope that it encourages other countries, including our own, but to follow up on that and to undertake such an exercise. Mr. Stefan Agnier.
Good morning. My name is Stefan Agnier from the European Commission. Thank you very much for these very interesting presentations. I have a question for Mr. Santoro. In Brazil, you said TADAT was a very good experience at the subnational level, and you will have several of these TADAT assessments. Have you thought about sharing this experience with the other states that have not the benefit of a TADAT, or some mechanism within Brazil to make use of this international experience in order to set up some internal peer review mechanism, and perhaps with support from the TADAT Secretariat occasionally on the methodology on how to do that? Thank you.
Mr. Santoro.
Na verdade,
Actually, Brazil, within the IDB pro-fiscal program, has a collaboration forum that is very active, and the states get together to reduce costs and make better use of the resources that the IDB makes available to us through pro-fiscal. So a good experience ends up being copied by someone else. So for instance, for the tax management software, Rio de Janeiro had bought it, and we decided to use it in the state of Alagoas. So the IDB was very smart in bringing everything together and making the most of all of these resources. And together with the TADAT management, we are working with the IDB and the group of tax managers, and everybody is discussing this at subnational level. The result we have achieved in the state of Alagoas has been presented to this group, and we have discussed the improvement process we underwent within the program. The line of finance from IDB, which has taken us ahead of the strategy planning, part of it is financed by the resources made available to us, which is the Fiscal one that will come to term at the end of the year. And there is an entire planning to get to the second line of Fiscal 2, and many states are going to undergo changes and adjustments based on the TADAT assessments that are taking place right now. Not just the state of Alagoas and Rio de Janeiro, but other states that are going through assessment at subnational level. The Brazilian VAT revenue is very high, and this change process will improve, as far as I can see, the management of this tax that has become a major issue for Brazilian corporations due to the complexity of the legal framework and for custom issue that we face. Just to give an idea, lorries sometimes may get stuck over 5 days between one subnational entity and the next. And the IDB itself has been trying to see how the different bodies can overcome that, and this has become very relevant. So when TADAT bring the external audit over, makes this a lot clearer for the different teams, because they are able to meet any kind of hurdle, any kind of conservative hurdle that is against this tax simplification we so much need.
That it will incite indeed the other states in Brazil to undertake a similar exercise, and that they call on your experience to do that in a coherent and structured manner, and they will reap the same benefits from TADAT as you have done in your state and in your previous state. So. Good. If there is any burning question, yes, we have one more time for one quick question, please.
I can't say it's a burning question. My name is Anton Kamenov. I'm with USAID. And my question is on the Canadian experience, and partly as a follow-up to the question about how how the TADAT applies to OECD countries. And the question is, was there a case, one of the TADAT questions dimensions, where the staff of the Canadian Revenue Agency said, oh, this doesn't apply to us, or this will never work here. One specific example of that type of resistance, and what happened with that?
Very good question. So, yes. So, the TADAT applied to all the dimensions that apply to the tax system, but for sure the context, it's important. In the Canadian context, we don't necessarily manage the legislation. It's another Department of Finance, that set up the the legislation, and we are the administrator. Often also because of our privacy and the law that we have, there is a certain constraint. But that doesn't mean, though, because we have those constraints that there's a fact. As an example, the growing debt. It's been in the media also recently in Canada about the fact that the debt is still growing in Canada. And yes, we can find all the excuses in the world, And there's good rationale also about that, but still, we still need to address that. So from that perspective, it doesn't negate you from your obligation. It's still something that's very important for the Canadian government and also for us as an agency to ensure that the debt, we need to find other way to mitigate that, maybe work closely with our partner to improve this. We cannot just sit and say, well, you know, because of our Canadian context and because of this and that, we cannot manage this. So it's a deeper reflection that we need to have. It's a different conversation. More strategic probably that need to happen. But no, we didn't have anybody that say it doesn't apply, but we spent quite a bit of time, like I said initially, to put the context and ensure that we have corroborating assessment because I knew deep down that for people who are not happy in the result, the first reaction is to say, well, it's for developing country. That tool is not necessarily applying in that context. So we spend quite a bit of time, if you read our report, to put the context. But no, overall, though, I think it was well received. And as a result of that, like I said, it's going to be part of our strategic planning to improve the agency.
Good, so there's no reason for the US not to try out TADAT also. Bill is there, so Bill, please bring that message home. Good, I think we are coming now to the conclusion of this panel, so I would like to thank the panel members and the audience for participating in it. We'll have a next session now that will be on the field guide updates, the update of the field guide, that process that is going on. And Stéphane Agnier will chair that session. So thank you very much for your attention.